All right, hey guys. My name's Tim. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Jetfuel. If you don't know what we do pay-per-result influencer marketing, or in the context of mobile apps, we do pay-per-install influencer marketing. And probably spent the last 2 or 3 years of our life trying to figure out influencer marketing. And a big takeaway from it was influencer marketing kind of sucks, which is the purpose of my talk, as well as some best practices. So after taking probably, well, let's start with a question. Of the people in the room, how many of you have tried to do your own sort of in-house influencer marketing efforts? Right. And then keep your hand up if you would say that it went well. Okay, and then let me kind of dive into that a little bit more and actually define what I mean by well. Keep your hand up if it has become a significant part of your overall user acquisition spend. We got maybe 2 or 3 people. We started with about half the room, which I think is pretty common, right? So to give a little bit of background, we started as an app development team. To introduce myself, as well as the company, we're a group of ex-Facebook people. I myself was on the Instagram side of things. My sort of claim to fame there was I made the app Boomerang, which is the forward-backwards looping video app, which tends to be somewhat controversial. So for some people, you're welcome, and for other people, I'm sorry. We joined up at some point. We decided that we wanted to try going out on our own. We've launched about 20 apps together. One thing I would say, if you're here, you probably came to the same conclusion that we did, which is that distribution is very important in this day and age. I think we were kind of disillusioned by Kevin and Mike's Instagram story of, they put an app on the App Store and woke up the next morning with 10,000 installs. That was not the case for us. We would spend a lot of time making these apps and put them on the App Store, and it was just crickets. No one would discover them. So we, as many of you probably did, and it's actually very well established and known in the gaming industry, you need to figure out distribution, which kind of led us into influencer marketing. We'd heard some good stories. Before we get into that, oh, I can't see the color at all. Anyway, whatever, there's color on this. Before we get into that, I want to define what we think about when we talk about what we'd call a successful marketing campaign, which is kind of like, or influencer marketing in this context. Is it ROI positive? That's obvious. If it's not bringing revenue, you're not going to do it. Does the ROI justify the time spent? This one and the next one is kind of what gets thornier with influencer marketing, is that sometimes you can get it ROI positive, but because it's so manual and there's so much back and forth, relative to other things like Google or Facebook, which you can just kind of effortlessly scale, it ends up being just not something your user acquisition team prioritizes. And then the other one is does it scale, which again is very difficult to achieve in influencer marketing. So this is what I would define as the traditional model of influencer marketing. This is where we started and where I'm guessing most of you started and what most people do. The biggest part of it, the biggest sort of thing that people focus on is finding the right influencers. And it's all about selecting the right people that match your game or that match your brand. Then once you've found them, you typically go out and you manually negotiate rates, you schedule posts, and you send payment. This is all kind of done via chat platforms. And then the big thing that underlies all of it is typically a pay-per-post model. I have a lot of complaints with this, as I hope, or I would guess many of you do as well. I'm going to roughly bucket them into two segments. The first one is that communication is really hard. This is becoming less of a problem, but at least when we started, there was not a good way to discover influencers, to find people that could actually do anything, or that had followings. Which amazingly, like none of the major platforms support any sort of thing like this. There's now this proliferation of these kind of like influencer CRMs and discovery tools. Does anyone here work for one of those or has started one of those? No. Okay. Then. At least starting about 3 years ago when we started getting into this, there was nothing that we were particularly happy with in the market. The other thing is, particularly, by the way, for the sake of this conversation, I've kind of honed in on Instagram, but a lot of these things apply across. It's very hard to get in touch with people. So amazingly, still on Instagram, kind of the state of the art and the best way to get in touch with people is just to slide in through their DMs and hope for the best. Probably some fraction of influencers have emails attached to their thing, but we find that influencers tend to be younger, often high school or college kids, and they aren't using email. So still our best channel for getting in touch with people is just DMing them, which, a lot of these people have hundreds of thousands of million followers, so their DM inbox is just full of all sorts of garbage from their fans. And I'd say when we send about 100 of these, we'd be lucky to get about 15 to 20 back in any sort of reasonable time frame. The other thing is this. So has anyone seen this screen? No? Okay. Well, if you see the screen, that means you're doing it right. if you actually try to scale the amount of people you're reaching out to on Instagram, Instagram will block you, right? Which is actually an important thing that we did at Instagram to prevent spam, which is part of why there isn't a lot of spam happening in the Instagram DMs. But if you're actually trying to scale an influencer campaign, this is really frustrating. So our kind of influencer onboarding reps have to do all sorts of crazy stuff. Like a lot of them will have like 5 to 10 different Instagram accounts that they'll switch between and go to the limit until they get this rate limit and then go to another one. So anyway, that's very frustrating. This is a great, so the other thing is even after you've established communication, so you'll see in this kind of screenshot, I'm now in Telegram, so I actually have a direct line of communication with this person. It can be very slow and you can actually get no response even after you work with them. Again, because a lot of these people tend to be younger, right? So this is a great conversation. This is an actual conversation I had with someone. This is like a major partner of ours, someone that we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with. And I was like, hey, can I get a post up in the next few hours, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't reply. Messaged him back about an hour later and say, hey, it's a bit time sensitive, can you let me know? And then didn't get a response. Messaged back about an hour later and said, okay, didn't hear from you. I'm gonna have to go with a different influencer. Can you go ahead and refund that payment? And about half an hour after that, he said, oh, hey, sorry, I was at basketball practice, right? Which is kind of indicative of like, a lot of these people are incredibly young, and what we would, I guess, assume as a professional, they don't, like for many of them, it's not a job. They're still in school or they still have another job and it's kind of their side thing. So if you're trying to operate in normal business hours, it can be very difficult. The other thing that is probably the worst part is that hugely variable outcomes. And I'll boil that down to this thing, which is that pricing is still mostly based on the number of followers, which isn't sort of an inherently bad concept, but it ends up being bad for a couple of reasons, particularly on most of the social platforms. The obvious thing is there's just a huge amount of fake followers and views. So I Googled, earlier this week, I Googled buy Instagram followers, and within a second, you can find a place where you can buy a ton of followers at a very low price, and this is very common behavior. The other thing that is even more frustrating is that when you're trying to do advertising, is that most social platforms now are governed by some sort of newsfeed ranking algorithm, which is actually generally a good thing for the customer experience. But if you're trying to use it for advertising, it can be very frustrating. So this is another screenshot of one of our accounts where this is an account with over 1 million followers. It's a very popular page. I post kind of funny videos from around the internet. And you'll see that kind of around the perimeter, we have native content or actual content that they're posting. And then the top center one is an ad. And this account, which routinely is putting up hundreds of thousands of views on content, when the ad gets posted, it only gets about 1,000 views. And that's because these algorithms look at things like watch time and how many people are liking it and how many people are commenting on it. And ads tend to do poorly on that relative to native content. This is a fun kind of anecdote. So one thing that Instagram is testing, the outcome of these two bits is that basically a lot of influencers are massively overcharging for the value that they're actually delivering. A fun anecdote to add on to that, one thing that Instagram is testing right now is this paid sponsor thing, where if you're doing a sponsored post, you have to tag the sponsor, which is great for us because when an influencer does, this influencer is posting about Volvo and has tagged Volvo, when an influencer does that, the advertiser gets analytics on how the post actually does. So you'll be able to see how many impressions it got, as well as how many likes and comments it got, which is really great. I've recently got coffee with a VP of Facebook that oversees the ad products, and I was asking about this, and it was, among other things. I was like, why isn't this out yet? And part of the reason, it's not the only reason, there's a couple problems, but part of the reason why they haven't rolled this out yet is because they have a lot of creators on their platform that they know are charging way too much, and they're worried that if they give the advertiser access to that information, it'll hurt their influencers because they won't be able to charge as much, basically. So they're kind of worried that, like, particularly in light of like other social platforms emerging, they don't want to take away their top creators' income, and that they're worried if they actually give the truth of how few impressions a lot of these ads are getting, that'll kind of dry up, which is a bummer. All right, so let's go back to that sort of framework that I introduced first. In the traditional model, which is I think this kind of pay per post of like manually finding influencers and putting a big influence on selecting the correct influencers. Ask the same 3 questions. Is it ROI positive? And the answer is maybe. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. In a lot of cases, we would see kind of like almost, like we'd see some that did really well, and then we'd have a bunch of other ones that didn't do well. So we could tell that there was some opportunity here, but we weren't able to consistently reproduce it. Does the ROI justify the time spent? I would say almost absolutely not. This is an incredibly manual process that ends up taking a lot of time, and even when you are able to get good ROI, it's rarely worth the time spent. And then the final question is, does it scale? And again, like kind of absolutely not. Like unless you're able to put together a media buying team of like hundreds of people. It's very difficult to achieve any sort of remote scale with this method, the same way you can with something like a Google or a Facebook, right? So what we ended up doing after kind of failing and having moderate success with this for a while is we ended up totally flipping the model and coming up with a new model for influencer marketing that I would kind of advocate for and encourage you all to try with us, which is that being an app development team, we built an app, and this is kind of what it looks like. But the general idea here is that we want our offers, we want to build a destination for influencers to get offers, and we want them to come to us to promote things rather than vice versa. So this is kind of what it looks like. I'll run you through all of it kind of piece by piece, but the most important thing is that we track everything. Everything is going through some sort of MMP tracking link. So we're actually measuring for every post that an influencer does, how many installs they're generating. So it's not just like a pay-per-post model where you don't really know what you're getting. Everything is tracked, and they only get credit for installs that come through their link. The other thing is we pay people per install. So it's not per post. They actually only get compensated if they deliver installs. The other thing that we've done really nicely is we make it incredibly easy for them. So influencers are used to being approached by advertisers and then having a ton of back and forth. We make them in this interface, we actually produce ads for them. So in many cases, they don't even have to create any sort of creative. They can just come in, grab one of these things, post it on their story, put in the link, put it in their Instagram feed, and they're making money, right? So it's incredibly easy and fast for them. And then the kind of biggest part is that it's self-serve. So instead of us having to go push our campaigns onto influencers, the influencers actually come to us and can kind of run whenever they want and as much as they want. So kind of comparing and contrasting it, the traditional model has a huge focus on finding the right or correct influencers. Then there's an incredibly manual part of negotiating rates and actually going back and forth, and it's a pay-per-post model. In our model, any influencer can promote, so instead of trying to find people, you just make your offer accessible to everyone and let whoever wants pick it up and run it. There's no individual communication. In many cases, you actually don't know who's running it or where they're running it, and it's a pay per install rather than a pay per post. So a few of these things, in particular the top two in our model, can be a little bit scary for an advertiser because you are ceding some amount of control. You don't necessarily know who's running it or where they're running it. But we think that the kind of benefits of it strongly outweigh that. And to go back to that sort of success metrics, is it ROI positive? The answer is 100% yes, because you're basically bidding what you know that you can afford for your app. So you'll set that, I'll pay an influencer 50 cents or $1 for every install they generate. And provided that you understand the economics of your game or your app, you're basically guaranteed. I mean, there's varying downstream, and one thing that we've kind of added as time has gone on is that we will automatically adjust people's payout up and down depending on the value of the users that they're generating. But almost guaranteed to be ROI positive. Does the ROI justify the time spent? Again, I would say absolutely yes. We have campaigns going back to we started as an app development team. We have campaigns that have been running for 2 years that we haven't looked at, and they're just delivering profitable users on the back burner, and we don't have to do any sort of management or anything like that. We've basically just set bids that we know are economically profitable, and influencer marketing is just happening without us touching it at all, which is pretty, for most of the people that do influencer stuff, that should seem really refreshing, because for us at least, there was a lot of very manual kind of tough communications. And then does it scale? Again, I would say this is yes. It's really a function of how good the offer is. But we see that when an offer comes in that influencers are excited about, that actually pays them a lot. So most influencers have some amount that they want to make on a per post basis. If we have something that's paying on a per install basis that exceeds the amount that they expect, they get really excited about it. And we'll see influencers running it again and again and again over weeks, and then also sometimes multiple times per day. There's also a very tight network of influencers. Many of them know each other or work together. So if someone comes in and runs an offer and is very happy with the amount that they've got paid, they will typically tell other influencers. Sometimes we see these effects where all of a sudden thousands of influencers across the internet are promoting a given offer because word has kind of gotten out that this is something that works, or this is something that you can get paid really nicely for. So yeah, I'd say that we've been able to unlock scale and influencer marketing in a way that very few other people have done besides maybe the Kardashians or something if you can afford to work with them. But we're able to basically scale campaigns across thousands and thousands of influencer accounts, which is not something that is kind of previously possible. Cool. Yeah, so I would recommend you do this. It can be kind of difficult. If you don't want to build it yourself, you can just work with us and we'll do it for you. And yeah, I'll land on questions.
Cool. Anyone got any questions? I can take a question. Okay, cool. Yep.
Hi. What's the difference between you and FameBit?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, they're in the UK, right? They're here. They don't do this. My understanding is FameBit is largely, at the moment, last time I heard from them, they were focused on kind of like music campaigns. Do you work at FameBit? Okay. My understanding is that they had kind of moved away from the CPI stuff and were more focused on working with like record labels to promote new artists and songs. Interestingly, when we started the company, we would run into them and they were doing something similar, but I haven't heard from or seen their stuff in a while, so I don't really know what's going on with them. So I guess that I don't really know.
All right.
Sorry, one question. Where are most of your influencers based?
What?
Where are most of your influencers based?
U.S. The audiences are U.S.
The influencers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. They're kind of all over the world, honestly. Mostly U.S. based. There's also a pretty big contingent in the UK. Yeah.
All right, cool. I'm really sorry to cut in and say no questions, but yeah, if you have questions for Tim, I'm sure you can find him around the event. He's also on another panel later on, so you can find him there. So thank you so much, Tim.